Welcome to Famous People You've Never Heard Of, the podcast brought to you by Bluefire Theatre Company. Each week, Lottie, Linda or Steve will guide you through the centuries to shine the spotlight once again on entertainers the world has forgotten. Thank you so much for joining us as we chat to our fabulous guests and find out more about these forgotten superstars of history. If you enjoy the podcast, do please rate, review and most importantly, subscribe so that you never miss an episode and more people find out about us. And now, let us delay no longer in introducing you to a famous person you've never heard of. Today's episode is all about the truly original Greatest Showman, the man who invented what we know today as the modern circus, and it isn't P.T. Barnum. Known as the father of the modern circus, Philip Astley was a superb horseman with a flair for the spectacular. He is mentioned in the works of Jane Austen, Charles Dickens and William Thackeray, and his story goes some way to prove that fact can be stranger than fiction. Astley hailed from the Staffordshire town of Newcastle Under Lyme, as does today's guest, illusionist, showman and Astley expert Andrew Van Buren. Andrew, when not touring the world with his own shows, has been at the forefront of the Philip Astley Project, the campaign to get both Astley and his hometown back on the map. He told me all about it.
My name's Andrew Van Buren and I toured the world with illusion shows and circus skills shows, and everything really started with me being born into show business. My parents toured the world with their own illusion show, and so I grew up amongst show business, from circus to theatre, film sets, studios, the lot, right the way through my early career. Like spending time backstage with the Muppet Studios and seeing them filming the Muppet Show, and down at Elstree they were filming Star Wars, Sapphire and Steel and shows like that. So it was quite an exciting childhood. And then obviously I started performing myself. I toured working in my mum and dad's show, and then teamed up with a Hungarian circus artist who taught me how to trick cycle, and then I involved the juggling, and then the plate spinning came into it, and became more of a speciality act. Carved my own career with that, with the juggling, unicycling, plate spinning. Picked up on all the game shows with the plate spinning, like the Generation Game and all that. And then everyone wanted a second spot, so I went back into the family trade of the magic and illusions, and then over the years kind of combined it all together, and that's where we're at now. So I tour kind of variety shows, but almost like a one-man and partner and team variety show with Alison, my other half. I mean, I look at it as we kind of completely crossed the board, because I spent so much time in circus as a youngster, and now everything's evolved so that it's all a melting pot. You know, for us, we've kind of mixed it all together. So we may be doing a theatre tour at one point, and then we'll do a circus season, usually Christmas circus seasons, but then we'll get pulled into do the TV work and everything. So I've kind of kept a foot in all of the historic camps that my family comes from. And I mean, my dad started in circus. My dad wasn't born into the business. He was born in a place called Sandbach in Cheshire. And as a small boy, I mean, he's 89 this year. So in the 1930s, when he was a little 4-year-old, his mum sent him along to the butcher's shop with the little note and the coins wrapped up in it for the meat for the week. And he came back and said, "Mum, the butcher's selling elephant meat." I was like, "What? Elephant meat?" "Yeah, well, there's a picture of the cow in the window and the sheep in the window and the pig in the window, and there's a picture of an elephant as well." And so he was taken along to see it. That was Chapman's circus. That'd be around about 1936. And he fell in love with the circus from then on. He always wanted to go and see circuses. And, I mean, it was war years were coming in then, but whenever they could, they went up to Blackpool and saw the Blackpool Tower Circus, which is an incredible building. I mean, it's like an ornate mosque inside. It's all gorgeously golden carved. And the circus ring actually turns by a foot and then lowers and floods with water, which there's 2 buildings like that in the UK. We're quite lucky, really. That's the Yarmouth Hippodrome and the Blackpool Tower Circus, where the rings turn, flood, and you have an aqua show for the finale.
I never knew that. I thought that had all gone out with Sadler's Wells in 1700 and something.
No, it's still there. And the hydraulics for the one, I mean, the 2 work completely differently. The one at Yarmouth has to be manually levered to turn it, and then it rolls down the rollers. But then the one at the tower, that's water hydraulics, and it's the same mechanism that was there when it was first built in the late 1800s. So it's quite incredible. A 120-something-year-old mechanism for flooding this ring with water still works. And it's actually, the water is always there, but the ring sinks through the water. It actually drops through the water. For my dad, in the 1930s, going to see shows there, it was incredible. It's like a different world. And you'd got the wild animals back then. And then the big turning point for my dad was, he was around about 8 years old, and he was taken to see a carnival, because where he lived in Sandbach, across the road was Foden's Motorworks, where they made the big Foden and ERF lorries. And Foden's put on one of these shows for people to stay at home during the war years, holidays at home. And they went along, my father with his parents, and there was a small outdoor circus there. And it was in a little ring, and there was little bits of seating and bunting, but no circus tent. And after the show, my dad wanted to see the pony that did the calculating. He would, they'd ask it a question, it'd calculate it out with its puff there, and, nod so many times. And he got talking as a small boy with the ringmaster, and the ringmaster owned the circus. And he was a man called Bob Gandy. And Bob Gandy and my dad, they became great friends, even with the age difference, because my dad found out that Gandy's winter quarters was about 8 miles down the road. So as a small boy, he used to cycle along the lanes and spend more time there than he did at school. I mean, he'd go and listen to all the stories of the old showman, which, bear in mind, again, this is the 1930s, 1940s, so the old showmen were from the previous century that he was hearing about. And that's the first time my dad actually heard of Philip Astley, the creator of the modern circus. And he learned skills for circus then. He learned animal training, which obviously now things have changed regarding the animals in circus, particularly in this country. But he learned the trapeze, he learned clowning, and then started to put the magic in there as he grew older and older. And then he met my mum, which is where they said it was love at first sight. But I think he also realised she was the right size to go in the boxes as well. So, and they kind of worked from there then, my mum and dad did. And it's funny because born in Sandbach, when he left school at 14, his parents didn't like him running away to the circus. So they forced him to take an apprenticeship. So he became a cabinet maker and French polisher, and did his apprenticeship with that, which was good on 2 levels, because the first level is that it made him able to make his own illusions and boxes and invent and build himself. And the other thing was there was a connection with, again, Philip Astley, which by then my dad had read about him in a book at school. He'd learned from Bob Gandy. Left school, did his apprenticeship, started working for Bob Gandy's son, Joe Gandy, and toured with Joe Gandy. That's 1953, 1954. My dad had just finished his national service, 2 years national service. And my dad took the leap then and turned completely professional. Didn't stay in the circus all the time, though. He then made the transition with my mum over to working outdoor events, into the theatres. And they made a good career with that, made a very good living. And then, obviously, years later, I came along. But between then, jumping ahead, I mean, my dad and mum moved down to London, and they started working in London. And then they got an invite to go to meet an impresario and a show producer about a project, and they wouldn't tell him who this show producer was. But my dad went along, walked in, there was sat Walt Disney. So you can imagine walking in blind to a meeting with, there was Walt Disney and Tom Arnold who put all the ice shows on. My mum and dad ended up working for 2 years for Walt Disney. And again, interestingly, in that show was the clown act, the Rastellis, who were a very famous clown act that are still going now, which is the children of then. And so the kind of link has always been there. And then from London, my mum and dad moved back up north after the banqueting scene and the cabaret work was slowing off. They wanted to settle down a little bit and invest the money they'd earned from Disney. And so instead of moving to Sandbach, they moved to Newcastle Under Lyme, which is where my dad still lives and I live. Now my place is here as well. So my dad ran away to join the circus, became a cabinet maker, and then ended up living in Newcastle Under Lyme. And those 3 points kind of bring us into Philip Astley, if you'd like me to talk about.
Yeah, Philip Astley did all of the above, didn't he?
Exactly, and this is the wonderful thing, because we're not sure whether it was through choice and creation or just an incredible coincidence that my dad had followed Astley's career almost in reverse, because Philip Astley was born in 1742 in Newcastle Under Lyme in Staffordshire, the heart of the potteries. And then his father, his background is a massive story, Astley's background. Very little really was known about him and his wife Patty up until 2017, 18, 19. But we've found out over the past few years, the research team up here in Newcastle have been working with me, that his family go back several generations in this area. And his family were actually a well-to-do family. They ran very successful businesses for several generations within the potteries area, the Staffordshire area, until Philip Astley's dad came along, Edward Astley. And in brief, Edward Astley was a little bit of a rogue from what we can gather. Doing our research, we found out that he spent time in prison. He was a debtor. He owed money. He did an apprenticeship in London in cabinet making, which he didn't complete. And while he was in London, he met a young lady who he ended up bringing back up north, marrying, and then took her to meet his parents. Well, his grandmother at the time, his mother, sorry. And the reason it was all kind of a little bit clandestine was because he didn't complete his apprenticeship. The girl he married, he hadn't got permission from the family to marry, and she was already pregnant. So in the 1700s, 1741, 1742, that was a big no-no on all accounts.
That was all a big deal, wasn't it? My goodness.
It was massive.
Reprobate.
Yeah, massive deal. So he kind of came home to Newcastle and said, "Hi, Mum, this is the wife and she's pregnant." Not great start, really. They moved in with his mother, and they lived just in the town centre, actually. We found out where she lived. And the young Philip Astley was born. He was born there. And there was other children that came along. There was actually 4 children in total. There was 2 girls and 2 boys. And Philip was born in 1742, January. His relationship with his father was very turbulent. His dad, from what we can tell, things were stricter then, but he sounds like he was quite a tyrant. And he got a big temper. And so quite often we believe Philip would have been thrashed and forced to go into the family trade of cabinet making. But interestingly, with Philip's relations, his mother's side of the family, his uncle was the postmaster of Newcastle Under Lyme. So we think that's where the love of horses came from his uncle, who was the Milligan family. Philip ran away from home, joined the Royal Dragoons, military elite, And there's a thing that really made Philip stand out. I mean, you know, you go on various descriptions of the man, but the general consensus was he was a big, powerful man. He was above 6 foot in height, with the proportions of Hercules and the voice of a Stentor. So he was a big, powerful, commanding man.
Well, there were some cartoony type pictures, aren't there, where he almost looks like John Paul.
Yeah, he was a man not to argue with from the start. I mean, as his life went on, I mean, sadly, when he died, he was not in a good shape. You know, he was bloated, but anyway, in his early days, I mean, with the proportions like that in the army, with this elite new force of the Royal Dragoons, you can imagine the size of horse to carry a man of that stature. And you imagine being the enemy with a man of that size coming towards you on the size of a horse needed. You know, you'd get out of his way, you know. And that, I think, is what happened a lot with him, because he rose through the ranks quite quickly, became a major, and he started leading his own platoons. There's various stories of his adventures. He and his platoon captured several enemy standards, all during the 7-Year War. There's a story of horses going overboard off a ship, and the captain saying, "Leave them," and he stripped down, dove in, and rescued the horses. So he loved animals, you know, he loved the horses, which I think, as I say, came from the postmaster, his uncle. And with his success, eventually he left the army and started touring around the country, honing skills. And then eventually, very soon, he settled in London at a place called Halfpenny Hatch in Lambeth. Now, that property, I believe, cost around about £70 odd. It's around about the same time, just after his uncle died and left him £50. So we believe the post office service may have contributed to the funding of opening up his riding school, which is quite nice to think, you know?
That's lovely.
Yeah, I mean, there's stories of him finding diamond rings on you know, the London Bridge, and all these different stories. Obviously, with all stories, there's going to be a smattering of truth, a smattering of showmanship, and somewhere delving in between is where you find the facts out and put it together as best as you can. So I think the diamond ring story possibly didn't happen, but it made a better story than being left some money. But we're not sure. So maybe both happened.
Yeah. There's an element of truth in all those legends, isn't there?
Exactly.
Yeah, dig far enough and you'll find that little nugget of where it actually started.
And this is exactly it. And I mean, when he moved to London, you know, he started this riding school at Halfpenny Hatch. And it was him and his wife, Patty, who, again, Patty, there was nothing known about Patty until we started delving deeper and deeper and deeper. And basically, there's a research team here at the Brampton Museum in Newcastle Under Lyme. And the volunteers just loved what I was trying to do. Started to research in the, not online, none of it's online. They went into the old books and started looking at the old business journals of the area. And that's where we started to piece together the family tree, because there was nobody that knew anything beyond Edward Astley. But suddenly, it was like the Holy Grail with Burgess records that are here in Newcastle. There's suddenly Edward Astley, his father Philip, grandfather, and it all goes back, all in the books. Incredible. And that was a great point to start with Patty, because it frustrated me that all you ever heard about Patty was that it was Philip Astley's wife, and she rode in the shows, and she did a stunt where she was covered in bees. She performed with bees. Yeah, there's a description which I'll let you read into however you want, but basically her hands were covered, but the description is that she had bees covering her muff. And we thought there's got to be more. And then we found Patty's life story and started piecing that together. And that's fascinating itself, because she comes from a military background and gentry as well. And if you go back several generations of her ancestry, one of her ancestors was actually hung for treason for taking part in the gunpowder plot. So her life story is incredible as well. It really is. And she was a driving force with, the entire Philip Astley story from what we can tell.
That's a whole new podcast episode.
Entirely new one, but as often was the case, it was the female was the secondary person in them days. But they didn't realise just how driving she was, which has become apparent now. Things have thankfully changed. So we always try to talk of the two of them in parallel whenever we can. But obviously with Philip Astley, the riding displays they put on in the open field, and then they realised that they wanted to see performance as well as learning how to ride. So Philip and Patty would put on these performances. Then they realised people were watching for free. So they put up a walled fencing, which there's a great illustration of this fenced-in area with the stadium seating, but outdoors. And then from there, he had the chance of going over to a more central location, which is at the south side of Westminster Bridge. And that is where things really developed, because with the riding, he realised if you set it in a 42-foot diameter ring, you could get the horse up to a gallop, and the centrifugal force helped to keep you on the horse. Now, I personally think it was two things. One, the practicality of that, but also the practicality of the space that it went into because of that plot of land. It fit perfectly with the seating. He created a stage at the back. They had the orchestra between the stage and the circus ring, although it wasn't called a circus then. And so they put on performance on the stage as well as in the ring. And they roofed it in as well because they realised if it rained, you lost your audience. So it was a roofed-in amphitheatre and all lit by candle. So, I mean, when you think, absolutely incredible, just an ornately decorated wooden indoor theatre with the ring in the middle.
That sounds wonderful. Is that the place that was on the site of where St Thomas's Hospital is now?
Yeah.
But they've got a plaque or something there, haven't they?
That's right, wonderfully, yeah. I mean, there was actually a plaque there in the 1960s. I think it was around about 69, 68. There was a plaque put there, which just didn't last that long, which is a shame. And, it's difficult because there's a big period of time where people didn't really see the potential of history. And a lot of history got destroyed. When you think of buildings that have been destroyed over the years and gorgeous architecture that's gone. And it's only when you look back and you think, oh, that was beautiful, isn't it? A shame it's not here anymore. So I think the Astley legacy went along that route. It gradually faded out. I mean, Philip, not only did he perform in London, I mean, there was times that the amphitheatre burnt down. Great disaster, you've lost your theatre. So he would then go elsewhere. He opened up in the Strand with a show. And, he toured it. He built amphitheatres all over the place. I mean, at the end of the days, there was about 19 amphitheatres with the rebuilds of burnt down ones that he created. He exported it over into Europe. He toured Europe with these shows. And in fact, I mean, one of the great stories that I love is the fact that, during his time, he was invited to go over to Paris and perform before the King and Marie Antoinette. Which, of course, when you think of Marie Antoinette, straight away it's into the revolution. Off with the head. Of course, that happened while he was over there, but he managed to escape, came back to the UK, and then a little while later, when things calmed down, he went back over to Paris to see if his amphitheatre was still there. And it was, and he found out it had been used as a barracks. So he petitioned, and he got rent for the use of his theatre as a barracks. So this was a man that went where, no one feared to go. He was the man that went there,
Oh, very, very business astute as well. My goodness.
He was a clever, clever man. I mean, there's a number of sad stories that go with him as well. I mean, the fractured relationship with Edward was a great shame, and they went their separate ways. And then Philip became the big successful businessman in London. He employed a man called Charles Hughes, And Charles Hughes was an excellent equestrian. He was a very good performer, trick rider. He knew horses inside out. And then basically his dad, Edward, Philip's dad, came along, knocking on the door. Philip gave him a job as basically publicity and horse hostler. He looked after the horses, he did publicity, front of house, he did various jobs. He saw how successful this business had become. And so Philip's dad, Edward, teamed up with Charles Hughes, and they opened a circus, a theatre, amphitheatre, about 1.5 miles down the road. So his own dad set up in competition against him. You know, so this is the kind of relationship that he had with his dad. Edward was a rogue, he really was. I mean, there was one time where he put an advert in a newspaper saying about Philip beat him and how he needed money to survive, and basically a begging letter in the papers, Edward did. You know, yeah, I mean, there's an entire story about Edward himself. But you can imagine, you know, with this grand scale and, you know, the fact that he created all of this and then it became known as the circus, set in a 42-foot ring. He brought in the rope walkers from the marketplaces. He brought in the clowns from the pantomimes. He set them with the horses. So the thing with Philip, all of the ingredients existed already, but it's him that put them together and set them in the 42-foot diameter ring, which became the circus as we know it. He went over to Paris. He loved it in Paris. He left his son, John Conway Astley, performing and running the shows over here in England. Unfortunately, John didn't have any children, so the direct dynasty ended there, at least with legitimate children that we know of. That's where Philip's line finished. However, his other relations, his brother and his 2 sisters, they did go on. John disappeared. The 2 sisters, they remained in this area, and one notable one, Elizabeth Astley, she married a couple of times, but one of the relationships was into the Hall family, which again was a very successful family in Newcastle Under Lyme. And the grandchild, James Astley Hall, became the mayor of Newcastle Under Lyme and donated the clock to the Guildhall. So the Astley name is actually still there underneath the clock in the Guildhall in the centre of Newcastle Under Lyme, which again, people had walked past it so often, and particularly over this last 20 years, people walk along the streets, they don't look up at the buildings, they look down at the phone. So it was another great discovery to make this link, you know, with the family and the history of the town and everything was marvellous. And I mean, that was more or less Astley's life in a kind of brief. He died in Paris in 1814 and was buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery.
Yes, I like that. Oscar Wilde's there as well, isn't he? And Jim Morrison.
Exactly, from the Doors. There's so many people buried there that it's an incredible, incredible cemetery. But the sad thing is, Philip's son, John, he went over to Paris and a number of years later died in Paris, buried in the same grave. But at the time, there was only a 10-year lease on the graves. So after that, the grave was basically just lost. And there was no stone, no marker, no nothing there. You know, just all decimated. So now there is not actually a marker to the fact that Philip Astley is buried in that cemetery. And with all these things happening, gradually he started to be phased out of people's consciousness. I mean, the other thing is, you know, after his death, you had, I mean, previous to Astley, you had the touring menagerie shows, which was a cage on wheels, like a small, not a caravan in size even, just like a trailer that would be wheeled around. And it was a travelling menagerie where people would come and they would see these animals on display, these great exotic beasts, which of course at the time, it was the only place you could see any of these animals. You know, you couldn't turn on the television and see David Attenborough anywhere, and to go anywhere abroad, it was, a several weeks ship journey. You couldn't jump on an aeroplane to see anything. So seeing these exotic animals like the lions and the tigers and everything, they were in these travelling cages. And then a man called Van Hamburg came over and he introduced the menagerie into the circus after Astley had died. So that's when the wild animals made the transition. A step in the right direction, really, out of that small, cruel travelling cage into the larger 42-foot diameter arena. And then as the years went along, obviously Victorian times came along. Astley's amphitheatre remained, the main building remained in London up until the late 1893. It was finally closed. Lord George Sanger was the last owner of it, and then it was demolished, and that had gone. That was the last true marker of Astley's existence. As you came into the 1900s, 1920s, you started with the animal rights movement, and obviously things have developed as time's gone along. There is still the wild animals in the circus, but also there's a lot of shows that haven't got the animals in there. Quite often the horsepower of horses has been turned into the horsepower of motorbikes. So, there's that transition, and circus is evolving as time goes along. Which brings us forward, really, to why Astley for me, if you'd like to hear that.
Well, yeah, obviously there are loads of similarities, because I was just thinking when you were saying about how he found all those different types of skills and brought them all in. And I was thinking back to when you were saying, well, I do a bit of this and a bit of that, and we've got variety and we've got circus and whatever. But, so you could almost be a reincarnation.
Not quite as tall.
Definitely not as broad.
But the thing with Astley, he had a love of lots of things. He published books, he wrote books. There's stories that he was not an educated man. Well, he was a good businessman, and he published books. One book is on magic. And there's a story of when he was in the military of two of his soldiers started having a fight, and he said, no, we do this as gentlemen. It's pistols at dawn. And so at dawn, he officiated on the two of them. The guns were examined. They were given the pistols. They back-to-back walked away from each other, turned, and when Astley said fire, they shot. And the story goes that Astley caught the bullets out of midair. So he kind of did one of the first bullet catches.
Fantastic.
So where the story ends, I don't know with that. But yeah, that's one of the things with it. Going back to my father, obviously he grew up with a lot of these stories, which means when I came along, I grew up with a lot of these stories. I always had the awareness and consciousness of Philip Astley's existence. And it was around about 1980, I think it was. We'd just returned from doing a load of filming. I was a little kid then. And my dad had just been touring South America with the show. And here in Newcastle Under Lyme, they always for years have had a carnival. And for a good while, the standard of the acts had been dropping. And so knowing the council, knowing my dad was in show business, became aware of him and pulled him into the carnival committee. And my dad said, well, why don't you start theming the carnival? For instance, why don't you theme it Philip Astley? And the entire council committee said, who? Who's Philip Astley? And my dad's like, this is insane. So that was kind of the big launch of awareness again. 1982, my dad oversaw, created and helped the council with their carnival, and it was themed Philip Astley and the circus, the legacy of the circus that came from Astley. We had, funny enough, Philip Gandy brought his circus in, whose father, Joe, my dad grew up with, whose grandfather, Philip's grandfather, Bob Gandy, started my dad in the business. So the relationship had continued and still does to this day. I still now work with Philip on different projects, particularly in the Middle East. My dad put on this 1982 carnival. Suddenly Astley's name was back out there. Now this is before the internet. So people started to talk a little bit about Astley. And within the circus industry, stuff started to happen. People were now becoming aware of Astley again. I think it was around about 3 years later, a great friend of ours, Chris Barltrop, did some wonderful research, overlaid maps, and located the location of halfpenny hatch, which was marvellous. So suddenly everyone knew precisely where it was, which was really nice. And time went by. That was it. Surely that's all you can do with Philip Astley. My dad continued touring. I went into the business, did my own shows, worked my own act. And then it was in 1990 that my dad and I were talking, and we suddenly realised that 1992, although Astley was becoming forgotten again, 1992 was going to be the 250th anniversary of Philip Astley being born. So surely that should be celebrated. So we started to talk to people, got in touch with the council here in Newcastle Under Lyme, started to formulate ideas again, similar to the carnival of years before, 10 years before. And we suddenly came up with the idea of a summer season of events, all celebrating Astley. And at the time, I was friends with a good many artists, still am great friends with a good many artists, one of which, a young sculptor called Andy Edwards, was working at the Royal Dalton School of Sculpture. He was a great pal of mine. And we said to him, what about making a statue of Astley? Because there's no monument to him. There's nothing anywhere celebrating Astley. So he and a couple of his friends, Juliet Dodd and Anthony McHugh, started creating this life-size statue. My father and I funded it. We commissioned it, we funded it. They made it, they cast it. And we have this statue then suddenly of Philip Astley in 1991, him standing with the stick and the whip as if making a horse rear up. Full size, 6'6", in his military Royal Dragoons gear, which when you think, the Royal Dragoons uniform was red with military braid. And you think of the ringmaster costume and the ring boys, red, military, that's where it came from. So 1992 came along, we came up with all these ideas, handed it over to the council and said, look, we can do this, we can do that, we can do this. They ran with it. And somebody within the council thought, this has got some potential here. This is a career move. So they took over and they pushed me and my dad out. So all of the events happened, but suddenly my dad and I had nothing to do with it. And it was like, this is crazy. Even to the point of, there was a press meeting, and it was like, we've set up this press meeting, and a friend of mine in the council let me know, and then I was given the time and I arrived, and it had been 4 hours before I'd actually arrived. It was terrible. We were heartbroken.
Oh, I can imagine all that work. And also all that, you've really got a personal interest in that. You're invested in it. It's not just like a career-making thing for a politician. It's different. Doing that takes all the heart out of the whole event, doesn't it?
This is exactly what happened. I mean, my dad saw it, like I did, as a way of promoting Philip Astley, put him in the public domain, have a statue to him. I mean, the statue we've still got, it's portable, it's resin, bronze resin, because that cost enough out of our own pocket. But it was a step to get a bronze permanent statue somewhere. And, I mean, sadly, it all fell apart that year. The events happened, but we were heartbroken by it. We took the statue down to Wembley with us that Christmas, and we put it on display in Jerry Cottle's circus. Then we brought it from there. It was in the ring entrance for that season because we had the magic show down there at Wembley. And then we brought it back up, and Gandhi's circus toured it for a while. And eventually it was kind of, well, what do we do with it? No one wants it. At the time, I hadn't got the studios, I hadn't got storage rooms like this. So Philip said, I'll store it. And it went into a shipping container. Bang, door shut. That was it. I walked away from Philip Astley. My dad walked away from Philip Astley. We forgot about it. That was it. We moved on. And I started really going it with my own shows, toured the world. Andy Edwards, the sculptor, became a well-known name. For instance, most people have seen the Beatles in Liverpool walking down the street. He made them. He made the Muhammad Ali statue that was at the O2. Him standing there, the famous pose looking down. He did the truce from World War I, where the German and English soldiers are shaking hand over the football. He's done so many things. great sculptor, still a great friend, which is lovely. And in 2008-9, I just finished advising the Royal Shakespeare Company on a production of Julius Caesar. And I just had my own show in Dubai in conjunction with Philip Gandhi.
There must be something there. There's a story there.
let me put it this way. I mean, that production is a whole different story again. So it was a contemporary show. The Julius Caesar show was. It ended up going to Russia, and they wanted advice on more like special effects, really, and the use of fire safely and such like, and magic. So a friend of mine that I'd done pantomime with previously was quite high up with the Royal Shakespeare Company, suggested I come in and advise. So I ended up advising on the show, and it was a wonderful production because it was an all-black cast set in apartheid South Africa. The amphitheatre of the Roman Colosseum was a football stadium set with the concrete blocks, and so it was the traditional story of Julius Caesar set in a contemporary surroundings, and that toured, and then it went to, But anyway,
sorry, we digress.
Which is easily done. It's a big story, So what happened next was, I'd done this. I'd been working on the cruise ships for like 3 months at a time. Suddenly realised I spent no time at home back in Newcastle Under Lyme. So Alison and I, we came home from these productions. We said, you could do with a bit of time at home, and we could do with thinking about starting a family. What we're going to do about it. 2009, and I had this crazy idea one night whilst lying in the bath. Is it worth looking into Philip Astley again, but with the hindsight of what's happened? And it then dawned on me in 2009 that in 2018 it would be the 250th anniversary of Philip Astley starting the process of creating the circus with that riding school in 1768 in London. Could we work with all those years as a lead-up towards some kind of big event in 2018? And I suddenly realised every time I came home, Newcastle, part of it was dying. There was more shops closed, there was more graffiti, there was less pride in the town. And it's a beautiful, beautiful town. It really is. So it was heartbreaking coming home and seeing the town dying because people, the internet existed by then. People were starting to use Amazon, a lot more shopping online. And I suddenly realised with the Shakespeare connection, Stratford upon Avon very much relies on Shakespeare.
It's the whole industry, isn't it?
It's massive. Dubai, all of the shopping malls have an attraction. They have a ski slope or giant aquarium. They all have something to attract the people to go there instead of to the others. And I thought, tourism, maybe this is a thing. Can Philip Astley save Newcastle Under Lyme? Maybe it's not about promoting Philip Astley. Maybe it's about saving his birthplace. And so I took a different approach with it. And it developed. I coined the phrase, when you think of what William Shakespeare has done for Stratford upon Avon, then what can Philip Astley do for Newcastle Under Lyme? Astley is our Shakespeare. It started to really resonate, and people started to listen. And it was slow, 2009, 2010, 2011. I was shouting, I was putting things on Facebook by then and social media, shouting about it. And it was a tough sell, even within the circus industry. It was like, will it put more bums on seats? No, we're not interested.
And we've all seen Barnum.
Exactly, which, the production of Barnum, the film, incredibly visual, spectacular, wonderful soundtrack, story-wise, complete humbug, baloney and fiction.
To use his own phrase.
And they had the audacity to call it The Greatest Showman. It should have been The Second Greatest Showman. Philip Astley is The Greatest Showman. So, but it did us a favour The film did us a favour, because what happened is I met in 2013, 2014 with a lady called Wensley Nayland, who was a counsellor at the time, and she knew the people in this area that I needed to talk to. I invited her over here, and funny enough, she came into this storeroom here, and I had the statue just over behind me on display. She fell in love with it. She was like, "Oh my God," I told her about Astley. She loved the story. She remembered vaguely events of years before happening, 1992, celebrating this man, and he'd become forgotten again. So she got in touch with the right people around here, and we had a meeting, and we formed the Philip Astley Project. And we had people from the film industry with Staffordshire Film Archive, Ray Johnson. We had the New Vic Theatre, which is a theatre in the round, which is here in Newcastle Under Lyme. Not quite a 42-foot diameter ring, but not far off.
Yeah, you've got to start somewhere.
It's brilliant. You know, that's here. The Newcastle Council came on board. I went talking to the universities, which the initial response was, "But circus is cruel. You know, wild animals, da da da." I said, "Look, this is about Philip Astley." I spoke to him at the end, Staffordshire University. There was Keele University, Newcastle College, Newcastle Performing Arts Centre. Staffordshire University said, "Wow, you've opened our eyes. Would you like us to manage the project for you?" You know, it was a complete turn. It was amazing. Everybody came together to make it happen. And it became a passion. The Philip Astley team became more like a family, you know, as opposed to just people working for their own cause. And it started to develop and develop and develop. And I mean, I worked like a lunatic, still do, towards promoting the town and the son of Newcastle, Philip Astley. And cutting what is another completely long story short, eventually things started to happen. The circus industry started to listen. I was invited down to a meeting with the circus proprietors who said, "Look, we can't do anything for you with this, but we give you our blessing." I went it alone. We put on events. The committee started working together. We got Heritage Lottery funding, thankfully, wonderfully. And in 2018, to celebrate Astley's birth, it went crazy. We had people coming over from all over the world to visit his birthplace. We had people from Brazil that have maintained a relationship since. We've had people from France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Hungary, Monte Carlo, Australia, Canada coming in. They came to see exhibitions that we put on here at the Brampton Museum celebrating Philip Astley. We had people, well, the big one, I mean, we had a series of talks, and I invited, for the first one, a great friend of ours, Charlie Caroli, whose father was the famous clown in Blackpool Tower Circus for 39 years. So Charlie came and did a talk. And before the talk, we had the statue there. We got the statue out. And there's a thing with the Monte Carlo. A lot of people don't realise the royal family run a circus festival every January, which is televised to almost every country of the world, predominantly apart from one. That's the UK.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, well, every year, this started in 1974 by Prince Rainier. Princess Stephanie now runs it. And the creme de la creme from circus all come down to Monte Carlo and have this grand, it's like the Oscars for the circus industry, let's say, and you can win the gold clown, the silver clown. It's amazing. And what happened is every year they have a new scarf made. And I got one of my old Monte Carlo scarves, and I put it round the neck of the Astley statue, had a photo taken of Astley with the scarf on, sent it over to Monte Carlo and said, "Look, the creator of the modern day circus is paying tribute to Monte Carlo Circus Festival with the scarf." They loved it. Things developed from there. I got invited over in the January of 2018 to speak about what I'm speaking about now, how everything came about and what I've done and everything. And just before the show in the evening, on the opening night, I was invited to a VIP gathering. So Alison and I went along to it. And there was about 30 people in there. And Susanna Matta, who invited me to it, she came to me and she said, "Andrew, when everybody leaves, you stay behind." I was like, "Well, what have I done wrong? Oh, what's happened?" And what it was is, as everybody left, then the royal family walked in. And I was introduced to Prince Albert, Princess Stephanie, Princess Stephanie's children, and we talked. and they unveiled a plaque, circular gold plaque, to Philip Astley, and wanted me to be there because of the inspiration from the statue.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Just wow, incredible.
Oh,
You know,
fantastic story.
it's so. And then Susanna, Elena Benicio, a professor in Brazil at the University of Bahia, Brazil, she flew over. She heard about it. She put on a symposium with me, which was the University of Bahia, Brazil, with ourselves and the Manchester Metropolitan University celebrating Astley. The New Vic Theatre put on a play, Astley's Astounding Adventures. I started getting invited down and made a speech down in Parliament about Philip Astley and the importance of, celebrating the history, culture and heritage of an area in a way of resurrecting a town. People don't come into town now purely for the shops. They need something else to bring them in. So if we can celebrate the likes of Philip Astley, what better way with events would give people work to bring people in?
And it's really good. It's spectacle as well, isn't it? With Philip Astley stuff, it's entertainment for people to come to, not just a couple of statues.
This is exactly it. You can mix up, the contemporary with the classic. You can educate the people, and that's exactly what we did. Aspire Housing and the Realise Foundation, they heard about what we were doing. They got in touch with me, and they said, we want to do something to help you. And there was a designer called Candida Kelsall who designed a monument to Astley, and it's stainless steel cutouts of two rearing horses and a ringmaster, 14 foot high, with the big circus tent banner, "Welcome to Newcastle Under Lyme, birthplace of Philip Astley, the father of modern day circus," underneath it. They funded that. Again, beautiful connection, because PM Training, who made it, they run an apprenticeship system where they take people that have failed in school, teach them a trade, and then put them on their course. So the apprenticeship, like Astley did, like I did in show business, continued with the monument. And that was positioned February 2018. We were going to unveil it then, but we couldn't because it was such a bad winter. We moved it to World Circus Day 2018, which is April. We unveiled it then, but it was put in place in February. And Susanna Matta flew over from Monte Carlo to take part in the unveiling of it. The connections grew. It was incredible. We made films. We had an animation made. The underpasses, the subways that usually are really grotty and unpleasant in most towns, was all Showman style sign written with the greatest show on earth, Philip Astley, the man who created the circus, 1768, Philip Astley creates the circus, all in the subways. Then put another statue the other side of town, the monuments as opposed to statues, celebrating Philip Astley. And the beautiful thing is now you see children going, because of that film, The Greatest Showman, which did help, they want to be the greatest showman. So many children now that have the fancy dress of the ringmaster costume, and they go and have a selfie taken in front of those monuments, which is incredible.
That's just lovely.
It's inspiring a new generation, which I've gone in and spoken to people in schools about it. There was a book made, written by a guy called Carl Shaw, who's a New York Times best-selling author, who lives in Newcastle Under Lyme. And he wrote The First Showman, which is a book about Philip Astley, with the research that came from the Brampton Museum and my research. So it's got all the new research in there, at least most of it, as part of the family tree in there, which had not been published before. There's so many things happen, and the wonderful thing is it's continued. The Philip Astley Project team have stayed together. Even now we're working on projects to the future. Last year we did an online festival, Astley Fest. We're now trying to set up a circus school in the town centre. We're trying to do it so that there's a trail for people to come, a heritage trail. We're just building on the story. And Newcastle Under Lyme, basically, from this crazy idea in 2009, based on the crazy idea my dad and I had in 1992, built on my dad's carnival in 1982, built on the stories he heard as a child, have all brought Philip Astley into the present day, and it's a lifeline to rescue the town centre.
And also give employment to all those young people and give a bit of aspiration and an added interest and pride in their area to the young people as well.
And this is exactly what it's about. You know, nowadays everything's online, it's all digital. It's wonderful that you see people wanting to physically see something and do something. It's with the circus skills, you know, it's hand-to-eye coordination, it's fitness, it's health, it's well-being, it's mental well-being, you know, to go and see shows. We've had visiting shows come here and visit, and you can go and see the circuses and learn about it. You know, people now are starting to feel that they own a little bit of Philip Astley's legacy by living here in Newcastle. So the crusade has gone from being, let's resurrect Philip Astley into the public consciousness, to let's, yes, resurrect Astley, publicise in a good light his legacy of the circus industry in all of its amazing forms, because, you know, you think of Le Cirque du Soleil with all of their amazing productions. They probably wouldn't exist without Astley in the first place. You know, you've got so many different varieties of show, with animals, no animals, with chainsaws instead of juggling equipment, with ballet, with opera involved with it. And you think of all the films that have been, you know, influenced by the circus industry. You think of the writings of, well, The Art of Renoir, Toulouse-Lautrec, Dame Laura Knight, all circus themed. Charles Dickens, Thackeray, Jane Austen all spoke about Philip Astley. So, you know, the Astley legacy, it covers such a massive, wide spectrum of life. Think of, you know, you go to a party dressed as a character. How many ringmasters, clowns, etc. How many children's toys are based on the circus?
I'm thinking of the equestrian stuff as well, sort of the Lipizzaner stallions over in Vienna and stuff. That must all come from him, because that's all in the round, isn't it?
It all has that basis of Philip Astley's military career, you know, and it's just beautiful that this man who influenced so much sadly never realised and never saw what it became and the impact on the world. I mean, it's like with Charles Hughes running off with the idea and coining the phrase circus. You know, there was Bill Ricketts then that worked on that show that took it over to America. You know, Charles Hughes took it into Russia. Philip Astley took it into Europe. So from that one Philip Astley, the son of Newcastle Under Lyme, worldwide. And thankfully, a big chunk of the world, you know, I've got write-ups where I had to do interviews with people in Japan about the Philip Astley Project. You know, there's been write-ups in Canada, in all over Europe. The festivals in 2018, like the Hungarian Circus Festival, opened with a tribute to Philip Astley. The Monte Carlo Festival had a tribute to Philip Astley. They unveiled the plaque as well, and they kindly invited me to be involved with it. You know, there's so much that went on. And it's beautiful that, for me, seeing something that was started by my family and that crazy idea of 2009 of, am I totally mad to try and do this a third time? I'm just so glad that I did. And it's just grown so much. That original statue now is on permanent loan in the Performing Arts Centre here in Newcastle Under Lyme for the future performers that are learning here to see this man they walk past every day, you know, and they can learn about Philip Astley. I go in and teach them about it. I do talks on it. You know, the story is spreading and spreading and spreading, which is, it's good for Astley. It's good for the legacy of the circus. It's good for the entertainment industry. And ultimately, hopefully, it'll be the lifeline that rescues Newcastle Under Lyme. And it's already becoming put on the map, but truly finally puts it on the map.
And I think once we open up again properly, goodness, let's hope that soon. But when we have international travel again, you know, the good thing about circus is, and I didn't realise this until I was in my first summer season back in Blackpool, back in the day, and I had mates who were at Blackpool Tower Circus, and
Yeah.
it was the first environment I had ever been in that was truly international.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
everybody had English as their first language, and it
Yeah.
is, and you don't need to speak any language to understand and enjoy circus. It's a fantastic thing.
The beauty of it is it crosses not just language barriers. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are, what your religion is, what your political leanings are, what your language is. Even in the audience, it appeals to everybody in some form. And I mean, the Blackpool Tower Circus is incredible. I was fortunate enough to work there with my dad in 1993. My mum and dad retired in 1996. And we put together an act specifically for the tower called Ancient and Modern, which is where the old magicians kept being interrupted by the young whiz kid magician. And every time I came in, it was on wheels, on roller skates, on unicycle, and at the end on the motorbike, which my dad and mum made me disappear on the motorbike at the end, so the old timers had the last laugh. And then in 2007, I put my full themed illusion show into the Tower Circus for that season of 2007. And that was such an incredible atmosphere, great experience. It's such a wonderful building to work, and having people completely all the way around you, as opposed to a horseshoe around you. That is just it holds a place in our family's heart.
So what's next for the project?
I mean, obviously 2020 and so far 2021 have been impacted with COVID, you know. I always say BC, before COVID. We're already planning Astley Fest as hopefully a live and online event for the 7th of August, which will be hopefully, if we can open up according to the plan, then live events will happen. But also we're going to do digital events as well. Last year's event was totally digital. There's already talk of more circus books. I'm hoping to finally get a permanent life-size statue of Philip Astley on horseback in the town centre at some point soon. You know, the maquette is made. Andy Edwards is on board to come back and rekindle his relationship with Philip Astley. And, you know, wouldn't it be great to have Astley on horseback in the town centre, next to the Guildhall where that other Astley, James Astley Hall, donated the clock. So it's completing the circle. It's come full circle. And also we hope to have a hub of circus learning here in the town where people can come and learn not just physically the skills, but people can come and learn about Astley and the spin-off of his legacy, where it's also gone into, you know, when you think of theatre, there's so many circus arts in theatre that are used now, and all of the spin-offs, they can come here to Newcastle Under Lyme and learn it all. So that there's a lot. We want more to the Heritage Trail. We want to build more of that. And just keep spreading the word, and also keep this international connection going, which, you know, the relationship with Monte Carlo is still there. I mean, one of the great things with the festival in 2018 is that they had a set of specially made juggling clubs made, and they were multicoloured with the 250th anniversary logo on it. They were launched in Monte Carlo, and they were toured around the world. They went to, there was 20-something countries they went to. It's great because they went to Russia, they went to Moscow, Afghanistan, Australia, America, Kuwait, all over, literally all over. And then the close ceremony as they came to Newcastle Under Lyme. So from Monte Carlo to Newcastle Under Lyme, and then handed them over like the baton to the next generation for them to perform with. And all of these film clips were put together into a film which was put online, the World Juggling Tour of 2018. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. And the closed ceremony we had here in Newcastle, Susanna Matta, again, flew over representing Monte Carlo and the circus industry, Fédération Mondiale de Cirque. And it was for me to give the clubs back so that it could go back to Monte Carlo. And in the ceremony, I gave them to her. And then she said, and now, Andrew, I give them back to you as a future relationship, bringing the world together with Newcastle Under Lyme through circus, to the birthplace of the man who created the circus. That was beautiful. And those clubs now live here in Newcastle Under Lyme as a permanent marker of just how the world is brought together through Philip Astley, his legacy of the circus and, well, the entertainment industry.
That's brilliant. I can't wait to come and see it all.
You'd be most welcome.
I'm on my way. As soon as we're travelling, I'm coming up. You could regret saying that. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us all that stuff. It's just the whole reason I set this podcast thing up was because there are so many people who are just underrepresented and not known about because they're not on the telly or they were around before the telly happened. And I think that you don't get better than Philip Astley, to be perfectly honest. When you think of the legacy, and everything, no one reaches farther than that.
Even with all the work we've done, it's a drop in the ocean of spreading the story. People still, even now here in Newcastle, like, never heard of him. It's like, are you blind? I think you've just walked past. That's a monument to Astley, and there's an animation, and it's these events that go on that are free for you to come and you see performances outside your shop window there. It's because of Philip Astley. We do it because of him, for free, for the people of the area. And that's the wonderful thing, because everything we've done has cost the taxpayer nothing. It's all external investment, and it's people like myself donating my time to make it happen. I've not earned a penny out of it, but I just feel it's important to happen.
It's not about the money, is it? Something like this. It's about so much more.
And this is it. If somebody doesn't try and rescue a town, then all the towns are going to die. And maybe this can be a kind of way of shining the light on, look, it's happened before. We're doing this, and we're publicly saying this is the trick of what we're doing. We're creating a unique selling point from our history. There's other people involved with this area. It's like H.G. Wells. When he wrote War of the Worlds, he took his inspiration from when he lived in Newcastle Under Lyme. He looked out over the steelworks of Shelton Bar, and when they poured all of the molten metal at night, the sky lit up red with fire, and that was the inspiration for the War of the Worlds. There's so many people come from this area, but you know what? Astley is such a just. It breaks all the barriers. It breaks down any animosity. It's an incredibly massive story, and as you said, he's lost, he's forgotten, and I just think it's our important thing to bring these people to the foreground, like you're doing with these.
Andrew Van Buren, thank you so much for joining us. Details of the Philip Astley Project and further information about Andrew and some of the things he's talked about today can be found on the show notes. Philip Astley was such a big personality that we thought it only right to leave the last word today to the man himself. So here's Chris Barltrop, actor, ringmaster, and author of the play The Audacious Mr. Astley.
Sergeant Major Philip Astley, late of His Majesty's Royal Regiment of Light Dragoons, horse trainer, riding master, and proprietor of the famous Astley's Amphitheatre of Equestrian Arts, Westminster Bridge, at your service, gentlemen and ladies. When I was 15, my father moved us from Newcastle Under Lyme to London. His living was cabinet-making, woodworking. See, he tried to make me learn the trade, but, well, you can imagine, gentlemen and ladies, that I wasn't having that, standing in the sawdust all day in the workshop. Though, as it's turned out, standing in the sawdust has become a regular place in my story. I joined the Light Horse and helped win battles for His Majesty King George, and then into show business. There was me and my lady, Patty Jones. Well, Mrs. Astley, we was married at Hanover Square. She become a bold rider herself. I taught her to stand on the horse, 2 horses. We started off at Halfpenny Hatch, Lambeth. Then we took a timber yard south side of Westminster Bridge, Astley's riding house, with displays of equestrian excellence. Well, I wanted the public to see a good show, so as they want to come back again. What we needed was some laughs, so I engaged a Merry Andrew, or Mr. Merryman, what you call now a clown. And there was other artists. Some had come from Europe and worked for Mr. Garrick in his theatre, until he proclaimed they brought defilement and abomination to his Shakespeare. Actors is artists. We are only entertainers, very hoity-toity. We was invited to the French court. We performed for Marie Antoinette and in Paris. I took my shows all over Britain and Ireland and into Europe. We spread the word about my new art form, and it flourished across the world. It still does. Huzzah for Astley's wonderful invention. I'm Chris Barltrop, circus ringmaster and impersonator of Philip Astley himself in my one-man play Audacious Mr. Astley. Astley was a sketchy figure in circus history, somewhat mythologized. I did my own detailed research and writing to bring him back to life so that rather than hearing a lecture about the history, people could meet him in person. In Newcastle, the Van Burens have also continued their own long-term project, which has restored the status Astley has always deserved, regionally, nationally, and across the world. I'm delighted that has happened. For my own story, I needed factual accuracy. I reproduced his exact cavalry uniform as my costume, made in the original wool material. I checked what music was played at Astley's. What type of sabre should I carry? How could I dance a minuet, though not on horseback, as his son John did? Did he start off in January or in April? I checked the weather records. And what did the French think of his first shows when he went there? My circus career meant I knew circus people well, in its determination, courage, independence, in its defiance of nature and of the odds. Their character reflects his. Their no-nonsense way of dealing with things parallels his. It gives me great pride to have commemorated and recreated Mr. Astley, starting on the exact anniversary of the birth of the circus on the 4th of April 1768, on the very spot where it was born. I continue to spread the word by performing Audacious Mr. Astley at museums, performance festivals, schools, community halls. It's an ongoing celebration of a great man and his fascinating story. Huzzah for Philip and Patty, and thank you, everyone who continues to this day the traditions they established. But now, gentlemen and ladies, the performance is about to commence in the circle. I urge you to take your places promptly. There is great demand. I take my leave to prepare. Thank you for coming to the famous amphitheatre, which is and always will be Astley's.
Thank you for listening to Famous People You've Never Heard of. If you've enjoyed this week's podcast and would like to find out more, do take a look at the show notes where you'll find further information and reading material, as well as a transcription of today's episode. If you like what we do and would like to support our work, please check out our Patreon page, which can be found at patreon.com/bluefiretheatre. Or, if you prefer to keep us going with a caffeine fix, you can do so at ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com/bluefiretheatre. We really appreciate any support you can give to help keep the show on the road. And we'd also love it if you give the show a rate and a review. It really helps us to remain visible out there. And don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, where we'd love to see you.